this video, I'm going to look at how to apply Pythagoras theorem to find lengths in three-dimensional figures. So in example 1, we have a cuboid which measures 5 centimeters by 7 centimeters by 8. And we are required to find the longest diagonal. So basically, if by inspection, if you look in the cuboid that you're given, the longest diagonal is this one here, EC. So the question here is, how can we find EC? So there are two ways on how you can do this. Method 1, we can start by finding AC, which is the missing length for this particular highlighted rectangle. And then once we find AC, we can use that measurement to find EC. So step 1 is find AC. So basically, by Pythagoras theorem, we know that AC squared, so we know that AC squared is equal to 7 squared plus 5 squared, because this is 90 degrees here. So 7 squared plus 5 squared, which means that AC will be the square root of 7 squared plus 5 squared. And if you plug that in the calculator, that will be equal to 8.6. So which implies that this length here is 8.6. And now at this point, we can consider now the highlighted rectangle, that triangle, to find the required length, which is EC. So step 2, find EC. Then by applying Pythagoras theorem, we know that EC squared will be equal to basically AC squared, which is 8.6 squared plus 8 squared. So which implies that EC will be equal to the square root of 8.6 squared plus 8 squared. Now if you plug that in your calculator, that will be 11.7. So this is method 1, which is a tedious method because you have to, kind of work in 2 steps. So let's call this method 1. So method 2 is much easier. But first of all, I have to explain what it is. So in method 2, suppose we are given the length, the width, and the height. So if L, W, and H are the dimensions of a cuboid. So are the dimensions of a cuboid. Then the length of the diagonal so the length of the diagonal will be equal to the square root of the sum of the squares of this length. So L squared plus W squared plus H squared. All right, some of you may be wondering, why is this true? Because we can show algebraically that this statement is true using the steps in method 1. I'm not going to do it here, but you can show that. But anyway, so carrying on, so basically from the diagram that we have here, our length is 7. This is the width, and let me just put this in bracket. So this is our length, that's the width, and that's the height. So we can plug those values here So which means that um, our diagonal will be the square root of 8 squared plus 7 squared plus 5 squared. The order doesn't matter. And that will give you 11.7. So either way, using these two methods, you can really notice that you end up with the same answer. And of course, by inspection, if you look at the two methods, you can notice that method 2 is much easier, shorter than method 1, but they all give you the same answer. Okay, so example 2, um, we have a situation where this is Sarah's new pencil case. So the question is, what is the longest pencil that can fit inside diagonally when the lid is on? So basically, the length of uh, the longest pencil that can fit into this is represented by the length y. Now, for us to find y, so our plan is to find y. And for us to find y, we first of all have to find x because um, we need x and 18 to find y by Pythagoras theorem. But now, how do we find x? Well, you can consider, so if the length from here to here is x, that implies that this length as well is x. And now what we want to do here is to consider this triangle here, the one that I've highlighted in yellow. So notice that the the entire length from this end to that end is 4, so which means that will be 2. So basically, we can find x by Pythagoras theorem. So our step 1 is just to find x. So step 1, find x. And to find that by Pythagoras theorem, we know that x squared, so we know that x squared is equal to 2 squared plus 4 squared because x is the longest side. So this implies that x will be the square root of 2 squared plus 4 squared. And of course, if you plug that in the calculator, that will be equal to 4.47. So that's this length here. So this length is 4.47. So you can just write here 4.47. So once you find x, we can now proceed to the next step, which is to consider this right angle triangle here. And by applying Pythagoras theorem, we can be able to find y. So step 2, find y. So you can see that y squared will be equal to 4.47 squared plus 18 squared. So because y is the longest side, and that can be calculated by finding the square root of the sum of the squares. And if you plug that in your calculator, that will be equal to 18.5.